Thanks, Laura, and thanks everybody for joining us. I'm actually really excited to get to talk about all things ESG and sustainability today with a really incredible panel that we've put together for you. So we're going to kick it off in the interest of maximizing the time and the expertise of our panelists here today. As Laura mentioned, I am a VP of ESG advisory with NEI Investments, and I've got great panelists all working in ESG and sustainable investing with us today. We'll all introduce ourselves as we get through there. As the moderator of the panel, I want to just kick it off first and foremost, kind of table stakes for everybody on the line. Our industry, in particular, those of us working in asset management with sustainability, ESG, responsible investing, is very nuanced with acronyms and names that are sometimes used interchangeably and sometimes not. So for today's panel, we had the privilege and opportunity to meet a couple of weeks ago together and just set kind of a framework to say that today we're going to talk about sustainability, sustainable investing as an overarching theme. And so what that means is not exclusive to environmental sustainability, but we will address all pieces that make companies, industries and sectors sustainable, whereby, still in business long-term, acknowledging that as a subset, we would have ESG risks, environmental, social, and governance. We'll have responsible investment strategies and methodologies, and so on and so forth. So each of our panelists with their own expertise will address ESG and sustainability in that framework. So without further ado, I'm going to kick it off first by asking, I'll start with Fate on my right here as the panelist with Mackenzie Investments. I'm going to ask everybody really just to share with the audience what your role is at your respective firm and how you got involved in sustainability in the asset management or investment space. So Fate, over to you first.
Hi. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. And thanks for the intro, June. So Fate Sagir, I lead sustainability, which includes sustainable investing for Mackenzie Investments. I got into this role. I'm not a trained professional in environmental sustainability or social sciences. I came through the business channel. I had my career has really been built on data analytics, strategy, innovation. I have a CPA, CMA by training, and I actually just now I've decided to do a postgraduate degree in sustainability to get me some of the technical experience that I need. But I'd say I came into it, it's starting to, seeing obviously the emerging trends in the industry, investors asking us for sustainable products, sustainable ratings. We're trying to kind of come up on our radar. And part of my previous role at Mackenzie and IGM more broadly was in research and strategy. So I started, looking at the Morningstar ratings, the MSCI ratings, and trying to dissect them, as we were building out our kind of, 5-year strategy. And so I had the opportunity to kind of, get myself into a role that I'm very much passionate about.
Wonderful, Fate. And so Maggie, I'm going to go down to you in the bottom corner of my screen. Same question to you. Let's talk a little bit about how long you've been in the industry, what got you into the industry, and what ESG looks like in your role.
Hi, June. Hi, Fate. Hi, Jeff. Nice to see you again. And thanks to our audience members for joining us. I love that we're talking about sustainability within capital markets and wealth management. This has been waiting for this for a long time. So thank you for joining us in this discussion. So my role is head of ESG, or environmental, social, and governance research and integration. And it's really about trying to make sustainability core to the investment process and ubiquitous across the whole value chain of investments. So that covers everything from due diligence through to security selection, portfolio construction, ongoing monitoring, and stewardship. And it's really that last part, stewardship, that gets my heart pumping, and it's something I'm excited about. Being the good, strong stewards of capital is what this industry should be about. And just to say that this is about good investing, so it's about long-term value creation. I will say that I don't do all of this alone. I have a team of 25 sustainability professionals spread across the investment management firm that I work for, Manulife Investment Management. And we're spread globally. So we, in Asia, Europe, across North America. And in terms of my journey here, I'd say that I started young. I was interested in these issues when I was a teenager, and I did my undergraduate degree at University of Toronto in environmental and social issues. But I started working on a trading floor after I graduated. I worked at Merrill Lynch, and I worked through the financial crisis. I saw that systemic risk was real and could have a real impact on capital markets. So that's when I started to really try and bring the two together. And fast forward to today, I would say that sustainability is now, it's core to our business. It's core to the investment management business.
Without question, Maggie, and to your point, we've certainly seen ESG has played a tremendous role over what was COVID the last 2 years, but even now with geopolitical risk and economic risk, it is certainly table stakes. We're seeing economic sways happen quite quickly these days. So thank you for that. Jeff, over to you to tell us a little bit about your role and what got you into ESG.
You bet, and good afternoon, everybody. Nice to be here. It's interesting hearing Faith and Maggie talk. Like there are some common themes. I also come from a strategy background, but not investment strategy. I come from a corporate strategy background. And similar to Maggie, I also spent a big part of my career in capital markets. So there are some common themes here. But I think my job's a little bit different from most. So I'll explain it a little bit. I head up commercial ESG, alternatives investing, and I also head up innovation across wealth management at BMO. So my role on the ESG side, it's really connecting the dots across 4 areas. Where we've got a topic where we have a public point of view, to the extent possible, making sure that we've got products so that investors can agree with us by choosing to invest with BMO. I also spend time bringing new capabilities along the ESG space to make sure that we are designing innovative and sustainability themed products. And I spent a lot of my time connecting different areas of expertise across the bank. Because when you bring together wealth management, capital markets, and commercial banking, you can have a real impact on topics like affordable housing, energy retrofits. Buildings are a big emitter, and there are lots of things that can be done to reduce that if we're really coordinated. And also recently promoting employee ownership as an alternative to private equity ownership. I guess the fourth thing that I do in connecting the dots is making sure that the education to our advisors, the experiences available to our clients, allow them to really clarify their values and then have an opportunity to invest alongside those. So how did I get involved in ESG? Up until about 6 months ago, I was running the global financial institutions practice in investment and corporate banking, so really different from ESG. But I got really close to the energy transition team and also the GAM responsible investing team. And so that allowed me to learn a little bit more about it. And I think that's an important thematic point, is that even if you don't have a dedicated career in ESG, there are ways that you can learn about it. There's ways that you can help generate great outcomes. But I'd say that the biggest driver is that I've been following some amazing things that my brother has been doing through Social Capital Partners. He had been a really strong and public advocate for small businesses during the pandemic, and he's also very involved in employee ownership. So I was inspired by a family member, and it started first becoming a larger part of my job, and then an opportunity came up in wealth, and I pounced. So that's my story.
And Jeff, it's a great story, and it's one I think of tremendous relevance, in particular with the audience we have on the line today. I'm going to jump around a little bit to some of the questions we discussed earlier, just to kind of correlate with some of the things you just said there. When I think back to my younger days when I was an undergrad and training professionally, there weren't programs dedicated as sustainable, a Bachelor of Science or a master's program or even doctorates in sustainability, unless it was very niche and targeted. And now there appears to be a plethora of designations and opportunities in that regard, and it's come hard and it's come fast. But to your point, Jeff, you mentioned you weren't an expert in ESG, for 20 years before moving into this role, and yet you oversee quite a large team, and you're making great strides in that regard as well. So I'm gonna ask Maggie first, because Maggie, you mentioned quite a large team of 25. And a lot of young people are looking to pursue ESG careers. It's quite a hot market, we all know. But do you need to have expertise in ESG? Do you need to be graduating with a master's in, climate change per se to be even eligible for some of these roles? And maybe what does that look like now as we oversee some of these new hires and new opportunities?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's certainly more and more awareness that we all have a role to play in sustainability, and this can translate through to our careers as well. But I'm going to pick up on a few elements that I heard in the previous panel that I love. It's not so much about the technical skills, again, I would say, because you can learn a lot of that. But, a few elements that I think are really, really key in your career, just, period, hands down, no matter what career you do, are things like passion. If you're able to follow, your heart as to where you want, what drives you, that gives you conviction. And if you have conviction, that gives you an ability to communicate, which is another key skill. And if you can tie that in with ambition, so don't feel afraid or, don't feel bad about being ambitious. I think that that's something that we're not told a lot early on in our careers. And I would say that being ambitious doesn't necessarily have to translate as being aggressive. There's many different ways to be ambitious. And maybe it's something that Jeff had spoken about earlier, about being able to connect people to and allowing your ambition to express itself that way, for example. So the ability to roll up your sleeves and get the work done will always be, a key differentiator. And if you work in sales, there's something called ABC, always be closing. Well, I would translate that to always be learning. So if you're interested in sustainability, this is an area that, is dependent on the sciences, on climate science, for example. So being able to keep up to speed on these different areas is really key.
And Maggie, I'm going to just follow up too, because I heard you say a couple of weeks ago, and it stuck with me. You don't need to work in ESG to be working to advance ESG. And I'm paraphrasing your comments in that regard, but I'd love you to share with this audience, job title aside, if you're not titled a sustainability specialist or an ESG analyst, it doesn't preclude per se your work in this area. Can you elaborate a bit on that as well?
Well, I think that's just it. I think you don't necessarily have to close yourself in a box and say, well, I deal with product development. That's not sustainability. Or I deal with sales. That's not sustainability. Actually, it's got to the point that this is now core to our industry. And it's now at the point where we all have to have ownership and agency when it comes to sustainability. So whether that's in your personal life, in terms of your choice to recycle or eat less meat or whatever it is, it also translates through to our professional life as well. And that expresses itself again in many different ways, whether it's through an operational capacity, maybe you choose to use less paper, through to really influencing the products and services that your company offers or the strategy. So I'll leave you with a framework that is an excellent framework. It came about in 2015 called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. And that framework gave us 4 key pillars, which are applicable to climate change, but I would say they're applicable to any area in sustainability, really. And it's about strategy and risk management and governance, metrics and targets. It's really about permeating this across the organization and across the business. And as individuals, it has to be not only top down, but also bottom up, meaning that everyone has a role to play in bringing sustainability into practice. So I hope that helped to answer the question, Jen.
Yes, very, very well said. And Fate, I'm going to come over to you in a similar, line of questioning. We've talked a little bit about at McKinsey opportunities for internships, and maybe not to the same question I asked Maggie, straight into a sustainability role or an ESG analyst track, but nonetheless opportunity to learn, to Maggie's point, and explore what that looks like in asset management or other. Can you speak a little bit to that as well, please?
Yes, for sure. So I think we're all trying to hire for ESG specialists and roles, right? We can't. I think there's to your point earlier, June, this was not a massive focus, right, 20 years ago. So unfortunately, there's limited expertise, and a lot of the expertise actually sits in academia. So there hasn't been as much in industry. So, and I always call out Maggie, because she's one of the few, and maybe even June, actually, one of the few kind of sustainability experts that actually kind of, you know, studied that as well, which is great and wonderful. But they are, I think, very few people like you. So I think in terms of what we're doing, we are trying to hire new graduates, and you know, and it depends on the type of role that you're looking at. So I'll talk about new graduates, and then I'll talk about some of our internship programs. But new graduates, like you know, more recently we hired a data scientist. Right, ESG data is a big mess. All four of us on the screen are live the pains of the inconsistency in reporting and ratings and so on. So we hired a data scientist, and she's been able to get up to speed, right? Maggie touched on the point of passion, right? And doing something that you love and you really think that will add impact and value. And so that individual is now, you know, doing something that she studied, but also learning about sustainability in actually in quite a bit of depth. We hired another analyst out of, I think it was out of the Rotman Sustainability Environmental Management Program. And there we had, you know, we really needed someone that had a bit more of the expertise, that had studied it. And so she's helping us and translate a lot of the data and the insights that we're looking at. So I think there's opportunities for new graduates to come in. It's still early, right? We're all learning. Like, I think I was talking to some of my CPA colleagues yesterday, because we're planning for a forum for the CPAs in June. We were saying, wow, this is like probably the first time in decades where we're all learning, right? Standards are still being set. You know, new education streams are being developed. So it's a great time, if this is something that you're passionate about, to come into the space. And then I think, just to touch on internships, those are a great way, I know, for our organization, and I'm sure for, you know, I'm calling out my peers on the call, but I think all of our organizations have really good internship programs. So if you're looking to test the waters and to see if this is something that you like, check out, you know, internships, whether with Mackenzie or any one of our peers in the market. I think it's a great way to you know, get in and see if it's something you like.
Wonderful, Faith. And I think someone might be have a hand up, and I can't see them all, Tara. So I'll just do a quick reminder. If you do have questions, please, by all means, throw them into the chat, and we'll make sure we allow some time at the end to get to all of those as well. Jeff, I want to come over to you, because you mentioned, you know, you came from various different areas and talked about you used the word innovation a lot. And you know, I would argue there's been a lot of innovation even in the ESG front over the last 5 years, as we all strive for net zero. We look at clean infrastructure, we look at all sorts of things that are innovative and necessary. But maybe tell me, in terms of your priorities, what are these emerging initiatives that you're seeing that might be driving industry change forward in this regard?
A great question. You know, innovation is a very broad topic. Innovation, to me, in the context of this discussion, is new forms of data, organized in better ways. So AI is certainly a big part of that. Being able to not only get clean data on issuers, but also to be able to get relevant in the moment data, so that if something happens in Brazil, you're not waiting until it hits the Wall Street Journal title before it comes to you. So there's lots of opportunities to do some really interesting stuff in the data space. I think from a consumer trend standpoint, I just put my hand up. I don't know how I did that. This is showing that maybe I'm not as innovative as my title would suggest. I don't know how to get my hand away. I think a really important thematic is hyper-personalization of investing. So we've gone in the investment community from having stock pickers to having index-based to having deviations from index-based. And I think you can see from an index standpoint that you've got a lot of ESG themes that have made their way in, and there are products that are designed around that. The next step, I think, is going to be, many people think, is going to be hyper-personalization, so that you're really able to express what's important to you, and then to have a curated list of options to consider. So I think that's an important thematic that we all need to be spending time considering and designing around. I also spend quite a bit of time on things like carbon trading, and so this is a little bit outside of asset management, at least for now. But you can see the way that the dots can really become connected between the coverage of issuers or companies and what we do to help them progress their transition. The outcome of that in many cases is carbon credits. If you've got, and this is going to Maggie's point of always be learning, there's a whole bunch of schema when it comes to carbon credits, whether it's mandatory compliance related credits or whether it's voluntary, but you're creating an asset. And so what do you do with that asset that also allows you to connect to the ambitions of your investor clients, be they institutional or retail oriented? So I guess the three innovation themes that I would raise is data and getting much smarter about that, designing products around that, hyper personalization, so going all the way to the needs of the emerging investor, and then finally what I just talked about, things like ESG, sustainability themed assets that are being created and how you can organize those in a thoughtful way.
I love that, Jeff. And there's a few things, I mentioned at the onset, we talk about ESG, RI, sustainable investing, socially responsible investing, all sorts of nuances. And I heard you use words that I use differently, but use them all the time. So when you talk about AI and data, I immediately thought of digital rights and some of the advocacy and engagement work we do as shareholders in that regard. When you talked about hyper-personalization of investment opportunities, I thought of value-based investing, where we're connecting what's meaningful to people or institutions with what we can offer in that regard as well. And you mentioned them both in the context of innovation, which I think is quite interesting. Carbon offsets and all of that as well, without a doubt. Even myself reading about that every day, reading about carbon capture, and it's constantly evolving as it continues to innovate onto itself. So really great, back to Maggie's point, always be learning as well. We've got just about a minute left because I want to make sure we leave time for questions. So I'm going to go back to Faith and Maggie. Pardon me, Faith. For students who are graduating soon, looking for the right career, what is, they ask, let's just say interview process, and they're looking to kind of get commitments from a firm in that regard. Are there questions being posed around corporate social responsibility at your firm level? So, looking at your institution, what does your institution provide as that internal culture around corporate sustainable and responsibility in that regard?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for us, sustainability has to be integrated. So even Maggie touched on stewardship. So for us, my team will not go and engage with a company on a topic or a risk unless we know we're doing it really well, right? Like there's exceptions, right? We're in financial services. We're not in industrials or utilities, so it's a little bit different. But it's making sure that we're authentic about how we roll out our sustainability strategy across our mutual funds and ETFs. So I think in terms of our corporate social responsibility, I think that very much reflects our sustainable investing strategy. And I don't know, June, if that directly answered your question, but that's what came to mind as you were asking it.
Without doubt, Faith. And I would reiterate, having worked for a couple of firms in the industry, and you referenced financial services, we are certainly, most of us here anyway, large major institutions that are trying to get it right and trying to do it right and constantly evolving toward what is, deemed right. So I think those are great questions to ask in an interview capacity for somebody. You do want to know what the values and beliefs and mission of the firm you're seeking to work at are as they correlate to your own. So I think that's a great answer. Maggie, same question over to you at Manulife. I assume, similar in nature, but I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, so I think, so two parts to the question, how does the company that I work for espouse sustainability strategy? And I would say for that first part that I would just reflect on what has happened to the entire industry over the past 20 years or so, as you noted, there's been a significant shift in how we think about our role, in the global economy. And so if we go back to some early days, if we go back to 2006, for example, that's when the Principles for Responsible Investment was founded under the auspices of the United Nations. And the role at that time of the PRI, the Principles for Responsible Investment, was really to embed sustainability within institutional investment. And I think if we fast forward, as we start to go more towards the near term, this has changed. It's no longer kind of a lens of risk. It's also a lens of opportunity. And as soon as you start talking about risk and opportunity, that really shifts the internal dialogue within an organization. So this starts to become embedded, going back to those TCFD pillars I talked about, it starts to become embedded within governance and strategy and risk management and metrics and targets that drive the organization. The very things that your senior management are incentivized for doing start to reflect all aspects of sustainability, whether it's diversity, equity, and inclusion, or it's climate change or other areas that the company has chosen to really embed within its organization. So if you're, looking at a company and you're thinking, is this, are they really embedding ESG and sustainability within their company? I would say that you can maybe think like an equity analyst, and an equity analyst might ask, for example, how do you drive value from your sustainability strategy? And if the company can answer that, then chances are they figured out really kind of the golden, the golden bullet of long-term value creation, and they are thinking more strategically about it. I would also ask them, how do they manage any kind of conflicts of interest that they might have, because that's something that still kind of can come in the way of really embedding it across the organization.
I love that point. The conflict point is so interesting, and the embedding it across the organization. Like, I think firms that have got it right, you can see ecosystems forming. You can see ecosystems across the various business lines, operating areas that are only possible if it truly is integrated, as Maggie said. And an example, like I'm just thinking back on the corporate side, we used to be very focused on green bonds. And then you go from green bonds to sustainability linked loans, right? Where you start to get a bit more specific about how you can influence operations to get to really great outcomes. Then you start thinking about the different, scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Then you've got supply chain finance, where you can use the entire buying power of an organization to be able to, mobilize for good outcomes. And then you've got, areas like I was talking about before, energy retrofits, where you're starting to tie traditional projects to actually having companies do things in a very different way than they would, only by virtue of having that financing piece together. And you can, to the extent that connects to what's happening in asset management, that's connecting to what's happening in wealth management, you can see an organization that's really working together to try to generate the right outcomes. Now, if you're interviewing and all you're seeing is little pockets, and the pockets don't seem like they're connected, then you might think that, at least for a period of time, your career may be a little bit more siloed than it could be. So I think there are lots of really smart ways you can get at what Maggie just suggested, which is that the organizations that have it right are really approaching it in an integrative, collaborative way.
Great answer, Jeff, and actually everybody. I think that I love that kind of thought about where you're working, not just excited to get a job and work, but really being thoughtful about where you are aligning your ambitions, again, which are very, very important. In the interest of time, and I know we have permission to go a little bit over because we were a little bit late starting, but by all means, if people do need to drop off, we absolutely respect everyone's time. We've had one question come in right now into the chat, and if you do have more, please do post them in the chat. I'll kind of manage this here for a few minutes. The question is wondering what some resources or books you might recommend to learn more about ESG for beginners. And I'll kick it off with a real quick 80-page PDF, lots of color, lots of charts. I just shared it yesterday on LinkedIn, so you can go find it there, from the CFA Institute, and it's their new ESG guide. And you can just enter your email address and download it, and that's kind of a real quick overview from the CFA Institute in that regard. But to all of my co-panelists here, what are you reading, or what have you read that might be a good intro to ESG?
I stepping into the job, I like reading books. I don't like reading articles or consulting reports. And so I asked around other people who are in the industry and said, what book can I read that's like a beginning, middle, and an end? And the Mark Carney book was suggested. The Bill Gates book was suggested. I absolutely loved the Bill Gates book. I read it in a day, and it gave me some concepts that were very accessible, and I was able to take them with me. And I've got pretty good recall of what I read, and it's a sign of a well-written book.
Yeah, I'll in terms of books, I completely agree. Books are the way to go. So this is one I would recommend, called Natural Capitalism. And it's really about how, again, like capital markets are changing through just a realization that we're kind of hitting some of these tipping points, whether it's the loss of biodiversity or climate change, that are changing how we need to think about, growth and prosperity. So I would throw that one out. I would say another freely available source, if you'd like to learn about ESG specifically, because that was the question, is the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, so that's SASB. And they've actually been kind of gone through a merger, and they're now called the Value Reporting Foundation. And they will be, joining the IFRS to roll out some of the new accounting standards for sustainability. And they have a lot of great resources on their website that are freely available.
Maybe just to add, I think going on the United Nations website, the World Economic Forum website, those are, everyone I think touched on risks and opportunities. That's a great way to kind of understand beyond the financials, what else is going on across the globe. And then there's one of the early books that I read when I came into this role is on stakeholder capitalism, which we didn't really touch on, but that is a big shifting trend, and one that we should all, I hope we're all supporting, because it really helps to provide a balanced perspective to organizations. But that's a great book of kind of the history of capitalism and what brought us here today, and provides some guidance on a path forward.
All great suggestions. And as some of our students move into spring break in a few weeks here in March, there's some leisurely reading for you to take on outside of typical coursework if you want. So thanks to everybody for that. Faith, there's a question I'm going to direct right to you. And I think the answer is absolutely yes. But we've got somebody who's asked, working as a tax accountant at a public accounting firm, wants to know whether you can work in investment and wealth management internships without being committed to a CFA route. Currently a CPA route person in that regard. I will say yes, and looking at the CPA framework not that long ago, a lot of CPAs are being brought into the sustainability conversation actually at the onset before it gets to any of us. So as a CPA yourself, maybe do you want to speak to that?
There's actually, it's funny, I can't now remember the exams I had to take for the CPA, but there's actually a lot of, I attempted to do the CFA as we were getting into COVID, because I thought I needed it to have a conversation with our PMs, but you don't. A CPA you're probably getting enough education in through that stream to have a very good career in investments. And then, the other thing I'll mention is on the accounting side, like this is the SASB and the Value Reporting Project, all these kind of emerging standards. These are going to be very critical for accountants, right? Often finance and the accounting department will have to take the lead on much of that reporting. So I think there's plenty of opportunities, whether it's on the directly investment side or on the more of the financial accounting side of a company.
For sure. And I would always encourage everybody as a strong WCM advocate, regardless of your background, if you want to pursue career opportunities, you can. You don't have to come through a traditional pathway of finance degree and so on and so forth. There's always ways. So connect with people, meet with people, ask questions, and certainly put yourself out there and learn as you go as well. Is always a pathway, maybe just less traveled, but certainly one. I'm going to ask this to the group again, and you guys are probably all maybe going to roll your eyes at me because we all know this. Many different standards, data providers, companies, industries, all of our reporting is convoluted, rarely correlates depending on where the data source comes from. How do we at a company level differentiate these standards and work through comparing the differences? So, you mentioned Morningstar ratings or ISS data, and we look at them and they're not always synergistic. What does that look like for everybody? And how do you deal with data when it's not one and the same?
I can, if it's okay, I'll take the, or start this or answer this question. Sorry, I'm fumbling for my words, but we actually, what we're doing is we went out very early when I came into my role and assessed the data, ESG data crazy space, and we leaned on an external partner to help us do that. And what we did is we found where are the most quality data sets out there. And so since then, we're now in the process, we're almost done actually, is pulling all of these data sources together and picking basically, out of, okay, we've got 3 or 4 data providers for this data point. Where do we think which data point or which provider gives us the best quality data, and coverage, right? There's the coverage is also lacking here. So there's a bit of modeling that our team is working through. But you're right. There's a lot of work that we have to do. And actually this past week, we had the pleasure of having Professor George Serafine, who's a professor at Harvard. And he's like can I call him the godfather of ESG data? But we had him come and speak to our group and just talk about, the kind of divergence that does exist across these providers and what asset managers like ourselves can do to kind of, streamline and get more consistency and eliminate some of the noise that exists. So it is possible, hopefully when some of these standards come through in the next, probably going to take us 3 to 4 years, right, to get there. Hopefully we'll know we are comparing apples to apples or oranges to oranges, but right now it is quite a bit of work for us to eliminate much of the noise.
Maybe I'll jump on that one with a few comments. I think one of the viewpoints I have for my portfolio managers is that it's like financial data in many ways. If you take a financial metric like free cash flow, you can't just take it at face value. You have to investigate, is this sustainable? Is there a one-off that's driving it up? And you have to do your own research to unpack those metrics and numbers. It's the same thing with ESG. You have to, and there's some advantages here to be an active manager, but passive managers can do it as well, to really unpack the data and do your own analysis and come to your own conclusions. So the ESG data providers won't, for example, give you those, again, coming back to those 4 pillars I mentioned earlier through the TCFD. They won't tell you about the strategy, the risk management, the governance, and the metrics and targets all in one spot. Maybe you need to layer that on yourself. They won't necessarily, for example, bring in the diversity, equity, and inclusion lens when they're analyzing all companies. But those are systemic issues that you should be looking at. So again, coming back to always be learning, just know what the industry specific issues are, and then layer on top of that the TCFD pillars that I mentioned.
But I'm in the same camp. I would add, so rather than repeating, I'm just going to add a thought. You need to have a clean warehouse. You need to really think about what you're trying to achieve when you're considering how to access that warehouse. If you're designing products, you're obviously going to err on the side of proprietary data. You need to be able to really understand your basis of constructing a product. If you're looking to monitor your portfolio, you're probably going to look for a lot of third-party validation. So I think it's really important to be purposeful with what you're trying to achieve, because if not, you can spend all of your days and all of your nights trying to sort out the cacophony of stuff that we have in front of us.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Jeff, and actually everybody. One of the things I would add as a recovered or former academic by trade is we often look in academia for triangulation, which would, be at least 3 data sets that are showing us, similar trend or something we can make sense of. And that doesn't always apply to industry, and not always does it apply to academics, but we do need to be discerning. And I think the other piece, in particular in our industry, we're very heavy with data from a numeric and quantitative perspective. ESG is very nuanced with qualitative need and input. And so, the numbers might tell a story, but the story can tell a more meaningful, rich, and sometimes more true story as well. And so you really do need to look at multiple sources and multiple ways of collecting data as we analyze everything we're trying to make sense of, acknowledging it's all overlaid then, thematically and so on. So great question, lots of great stuff. In the interest of time, we're 2 minutes over, so I am going to wrap it up here and certainly send it back, I think, to Tara or Lara. I want to just encourage everybody on the call, though. I know we've got quite a nice group, and I think you've got so much excitement and opportunity ahead of you as students in this area. The field is growing immensely. Be curious about what's happening. Learn. It's ever changing. Be ambitious. And everybody on the panel told you today, be a bit audacious. Ask questions. Be aggressive. Be assertive. People will help you on this journey if you ask the right questions and let them know where you want to go, and they'll help you get there. So on behalf of the entire panel, thank you to my colleagues. It's always great to chat with you, and on a Saturday, it feels a little less stuffy and more casual. So thanks for spending your weekend with me, as well to everyone on the stage. And Tara, I'll send it back over to you.